Welcome to this episode of our program Arab Affairs. As usual, we will be discussing a very important Arab file, incidents and developments that are taking place in the Middle East. Those days, the most important two issues are a surprise ceasefire or a surprise fragile ceasefire. The U.S. has announced 5 days ago, or rather a few days ago, it has announced a 5-day pause in Turkey's cross-border aggression against the northern Syria and against, of course, Kurds. And that came after 4 hours of talks at Erdogan's presidential palace in Ankara, where U.S. Vice President Mike Pence met with Erdogan, delivering an important letter from President Trump. Definitely, President Trump has been very much criticized for pulling the U.S. forces from Syria, and most of the U.S. Senate have been describing such a move as a strategic nightmare. We'll be speaking about the situation in Syria, also in Lebanon. Lebanon today is bracing for the third day of unrests as rage sweeps the country over economic reforms put by the Lebanese government. We'll be speaking about both situation, the dangerous situation and the development in both countries in our episode. Before we delve into our discussion, first let's have a quick look on the Arab news that took place during this week, and we'll come back for more discussion.
Expressed sincere wishes of success to President Qais Said and said he is looking forward to expand joint operation in various domains. The president stressed keenness on boosting consultation over several issues of mutual concern. Qais Said won a landslide victory in Tunisia's presidential election, which he hailed as a new revolution. According to preliminary official results released by the Electoral Commission on Monday, he won 73% of the votes cast in Sunday's election and turnout was 55%. His opponent Nabil Al-Qarwi had already conceded defeat. Said's victory is a stinging rebuke for the governing elite that has failed to improve living standards or end corruption since 2011 revolution in the North African country. Said, a 61-year-old retired law professor, wants to introduce an experimental form of direct democracy. French top diplomat held talks in Baghdad among transferring foreign terrorists from northern Syria, where a Turkish offensive has triggered fears from mass jail breakouts to be tried in Iraq. The issue was top of the agenda for French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian in his talks with his Iraqi counterpart Mohammed Ali Al-Hakim, President Barham Saleh and Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi. Le Drian said that France needed to work things out with the Iraqi authorities so that both sides can find a way to have a judicial mechanism that is able to judge all these fighters. Belgium, Britain, Denmark, France, Germany, and the Netherlands and Sweden sent officials on a technical mission to Baghdad this week to assess the situation. Chief of Sudan's ruling Sovereign Council General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan issued late on Wednesday a constitutional declaration of a permanent ceasefire nationwide. Despite his decision, the mediation panel and the direct peace talks between government and Sudan's People's Liberation Movement delegations announced that talks have been postponed on one day. The panel said that this was due to the movement's protest against a breach of ceasefire in latest Idlis in southern Kordofan and to hold more consultations between the government and the popular movement. Juba had been hosting talks between new Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdouk's government and delegates from the two umbrella groups of rebels who fought now ousted President Omar al-Bashir forces in Darfur, Blue Nile, and South Kordofan states.
Right, welcome back. And as we were speaking about Syria and the developments in Syria, a senior Turkish official said that surprise deal to suspend Turkey's military offensive, rather Turkish aggression against the Kurdish-led forces and its invasion to the northern Syria hinged on the Turkish president demand that Washington's agree a time limit on any ceasefire. Despite this somber start, officials from both sides say a draft accord had already been sketched out ahead of the meeting, but crucial obstacles remained ahead of a deal that to halt the latest battle in Syria's ruinous 8-year civil war. Guest to highlight the situation in Syria, we have with us over the phone Ambassador Nabil Badr, former Assistant Foreign Minister and Head of the European Department at the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Good afternoon to you, sir. Hello? 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 Ambassador Nabil? Ambassador Nabil? Right. I guess I have a technical problem. We'll get back to Ambassador Nabil later on. The goal of such an accord was to stem a fresh humanitarian crisis which has put 200,000 civilians in flight in northern Syria as of a claim to scare a security zone. This is already a security scare over thousands of the Kurdish people who are part of the Syrian country. Of course, that has another angle of threat, which is Daesh terrorist group and the terrorism or terrorist groups who are occurring in this area. I guess we've returned back to Ambassador Nabil Badr. Ambassador Nabil Badr.
Yes, hello.
Good afternoon to you, sir. And we're speaking... Yes. And we are speaking about the development in Syria and the surprising ceasefire that was announced by the US between Turkey and the Kurds that has at least limited or stopped the Turkish aggression on northern Syria. And how do you view such a development?
Well, I see it from more than one angle. The first angle, which makes me really quite uncomfortable, is that Syria as a country has been exposed to an aggression from another country, and that should be dealt with accordingly. But to be quite factual, looking into the area and knowing where the access and the complications that happen, we are confronted with that new situation. I think ultimately that if we read that, it's an interim sort of a solution. Because, in other words, not all the facts concerning that agreement have been declared quite clearly. What has been declared up to this moment is the limitations imposed on the Turkish forces and the ceasefire, which has been timed and up to a certain time, up to I think Monday, yes, and after that we'll see what happens. Of course, there have been more than one breach of that ceasefire on the Turkish side. But to look at it from a political angle, at least from the American point of view, it's a way of opening the door ajar for the Turks to get rid from that riddle at that point. It's not a solution, I should say, because Erdogan has his ambitions and his, as well, images and dreams of an empire and so on and so forth. So I'm not quite sure of that solution and that if it is going to last. The second thing, what is the reaction on the Russian side as well?
Yes.
They are waiting for more facts. Of course, there are more than one contact going on between the two superpowers, if I might put it that way.
Yes, but Ambassador, but before we move into this prospect of this encounter between the Turkish president and President Putin, which is expected in few days, let me ask you, how do you view the Turkish real aim of such an incursion into northern Syria? And is part of Erdogan's plans to overcome the economic disruption which has already hit his country and the disruption that has hit his country internally in terms of the political and economic situation?
The first message, really, which should be directed towards the Arab countries and the countries in this part of the world. This is a country, an aggressor, a new aggressor, regrettably, which we have to confront. And his ambitions and appetite for absorbing more land, more of our land, is quite evident. And we should do something about that. And that should be really quite evident and quite convincing to all the parties concerned, including the international players that so far play the biggest role as far as we can see. The second thing, that Turkey certainly is targeting Arab territories in Iraq and Syria. And there are other attendants as well waiting to see what's going to happen with all of that. Quite clearly, we have Iran as well. In other words, the regional fragility and regrettably the weakness which we have witnessed in the last years has had its, of course, reaction on these regional countries that really look for extending their influences, and the two main powers which are playing have complex relationships with these two countries, and of course look at the whole thing from the angle of what are the basic interests, which is quite normal in the international politics. Now, let me stress that ultimately Syria is a sovereign country. That sovereignty should be respected. It is independent. It has its borders recognized. It's a member of the United Nations, and it has been exposed to an aggression. And whatever arrangements are dealt with at that angle on the part of the United States with Turkey to find a way out of the present crisis, it's not the end of the game. We shall see more probably problems, complications, and the effort which has been exerted is directed more to contain, not to extend, but not to solve, not to respect the Syrian sovereignty and the Syrian rights. And that should be stressed on the Arab side quite clearly and without any doubts. Now, to come back to the solution, including the coming meeting between Putin and Erdogan, well, I do remember quite well that Russia has declared before more than one time that the sovereignty of Syria should not be breached, should be recognized, its borders as well, its integrity as a country, and it has tried to play a role in soothing matters between the government in Damascus and the Kurds, as we know, which paved the way between the parties to let away before the Syrian army to proceed to the Syrian international borders. Now, looking forward to that, the Syrian borders and the Syrian army should be placed all along the Syrian international borders with Turkey without any hindrance. That's number one. Number two, whatever arrangements to contain the fight have been taking place, but they are temporary, and that should be declared quite clearly. And three, the problem of the immigration and immigrants should be dealt with internationally to let them proceed to their homeland without using Turkey or Turkey using that element in the situation as an excuse for aggression and other foul actions the way we see it now.
Yes, Ambassador Badri, you brought up a very important point. Two issues. First, this meeting between the Turkish president and the Russian president, and it was very surprising that the Russian president or Russia blocked an Arab demand for a resolution from the UN Security Council against the Turkish aggression on Syria. So it was very surprising, the Russian block to such a resolution. And the other issue is the European move. Now we are aware that the Turkish president has always threatened Europe of unleashing, or rather sending, the Syrian refugees if they do not heed to his demands with money, supporting him in Turkey with money needed, and just heeding to whatever movement he carries out with. Now, both situations here are very much or raise big question marks here. How do you view that?
Well, I mean, it's quite clear. I'm not really surprised at all. Well, looking back to the last 2-3 days or so, let me remind that there have been 2 sessions held for the Security Council. Security Council is the top organization within the United Nations, which has been established in 1945 to maintain and keep peace, etc., etc., etc. And the 2 sessions, number 1, have been closed sessions. 2, ended with no decision at all. 3, that the voting, as has been mentioned, was hindered on the part of U.S. and Russia. In other words, the solutions were dealt with outside that venue, which was a way of letting some of the vapor, political vapor, come out, but without no driving force in the right direction. 2, after that, to let things, well, in a way, calm down and to accommodate the situation to the tactics of soothing the parties, playing with them, including Turkey, in a way which would be suitable or comfortable to this or that party, and at the same time to wind up a solution, temporary as we see it, as I say, which has been executed. In other words, an absence or a deliberate ignoring of the impact of aggression according to all the charters and the United Nations and so on and so forth, and it's not a comfortable something. As a matter of fact, the amount of reaction which was dealt with and still is booming in Europe and all around us should be interpreted to something more effective. The Syrian problem as a whole has moved in the last phase before the formation of the constitution dialogue, which we look forward to its success, hopefully, if it works, in the direction of considering it really a threat to peace in the area and in this part of the world. And accordingly, everybody cursed, including the international community. In the same spirit, I hope that should be inspired towards the solution of the Syrian problem, including stopping the aggression and ending the temporary, uninterpreted, and unexcused aggression of Turkey, and finding an international solution for the immigrants, taking them back home, and stopping Turkey from embezzling the whole world, and Europe in particular, to get more money to keep them, as it says, and at the same time to give itself excuses to occupy other parts of another country. I think this is evident. Where is the factor which hopefully would help? I'm not saying definitely solve, but help and help significantly. It's a strong Arab situation in spite of the problems we all know on this part of the world and on this area in particular.
Yes. I guess we'll have to wait and see how the Syrian crisis unfold in this upcoming days, and we'll be following up with that. But also another crisis taking place just in the neighborhood, which is in Lebanon. And Lebanon today braced for the third day of protests, and yesterday the Lebanese Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri gave his government a 72-hour deadline to agree on reforms that could ward off economic crisis. How do you view the situation in Lebanon? How do you think matters would develop, and what is the core problem?
Well, I hope it works. It's really very difficult. Let me say that the basic problem in Lebanon has been, and still is, especially now, because of the Lebanese difficulties and because of the Syrian reaction and because of the weakness of the neighboring Arab countries, is that the national state within Lebanon is there, has problems, and sometimes is weak. Weak because of factionalism, of political bias, of maintaining the status quo, and no will to give way to the national state, which looks to the interests of the whole Lebanese as citizens. And this is a process which has been there, is still there, will go on for some time until that is solved or amended by the will of the Lebanese themselves, because that's best for Lebanon, for maintaining its status, its independence, its integrity, and its future. It has a lot of potential, a lot of background, a lot of very intelligent population, active, and have a lot of experience, and generally accepted internationally as a friendly country. Now, Saad al-Hariri is trying to eliminate some of the factors that hinder that at that juncture. I wish him well, because the substitute is really very dangerous. Another government to be formed is going to take quite some time. I don't know how. Will be exposed to lots of bargains too. The external interventions are terrible, which might hinder that for the sake of this country or that country. And ultimately, there is no magic that will solve the economic problem. It needs a safe, calm, domestic atmosphere, a well-studied solution, and certainly the participation and the help of the people themselves. Now, the political factions within his cabinet, Saad al-Hariri's cabinet, which are 30 ministers. Why 30? Because that number became 30 because he had to introduce in the cabinet representatives from the different factions. So the effectiveness and the harmony, and I would say, regrettably, what looks even sometimes as the absence of the unity and national sense, which is the core of the national state, is not always there. Now, we shall see what will happen. We wish him well. And I think what might help in that is that in due time, not a short time, after having a reasonable background on which he can lay the grounds for some solutions, these solutions really be discussed and get started, involving everybody and putting every faction before its responsibility. But I would say it is in the best interest of Lebanon at that juncture and of the area as well, and in the face of serious developments regionally, including the Turkish appetite to maintain, sustain the Lebanese unity in a way which can help solving its economic problems and other problems as well.
Yes. Ambassador Nabil Badr, former Assistant Foreign Minister and the head of the European Department at the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs, we thank you so much for being with us. Before we continue on with our discussion, let's have a quick report and we'll come back for more discussion.
Egypt reaffirmed that it was following with deep concern the continued Turkish aggression on Syria. A statement issued by the Foreign Ministry said that this represents a violation of the international law and has serious repercussions on the humanitarian situation, in addition to the loss of lives and the displacement of tens of thousands of people. The statement referred to the stance of the European Union, which rejected and condemned the Turkish attacks. On the ground, shelling and gunfire rounded in the area of northeast Syria's Ras Al Ain town on Friday, a day after Turkey agreed with the United States to pause its offensive in Syria for 5 days. The truce was announced by American Vice President Mike Pence after talks in Ankara with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and was praised by President Donald Trump. Turkey has agreed to suspend its Syria's offensive for 5 days and would end the assault if Kurdish-led forces withdraw from a safe zone along the border. Under the deal, Kurdish forces will have to withdraw from an area of 32 kilometers deep, becoming a safe zone long sought by Turkey. For their part, the Syrian Democratic Forces said that the forces were ready to abide by the ceasefire, covering the area from Ras Al Ain to Tell Abyad. But American Special Envoy to Syria, James Jeffrey, acknowledged that the Kurdish fighters were not happy with the inked deal. Earlier, Kurdish authorities in northeastern Syria accused Turkey of resorting to banned weapons such as napalm and white phosphorus munitions. In a statement issued 8 days into the deadly offensive, the Kurdish administration said that Turkey had resorted to their use because of unexpectedly stiff resistance by Kurdish fighters in the key border of Ras Al Ain. Kurdish officials posted a video on social media showing children with burns, and one doctor in Al Hasaka province argues that consistent with the use of banned weapons. A spokesman for the Syrian Democratic Forces called on international organizations to send in experts. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights meanwhile said that more than 300,000 civilians had been displaced within Syria since the start of the assault.
Right, welcome back. That is the situation on the ground late until yesterday, Friday. The Turkish U.S. announced, or rather the U.S. imposed ceasefire on Turkey is still taking place, no matter how fragile it is, but it seems that there has to be another step forward for agreeing into more details of of such an agreement. I guess we have with us over the phone Engineer Hassan Shaban, political analyst. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
As seen that a few days ago, the U.S. Vice President went and met with the Turkish President, after which a 5-day pause in Turkey's cross-border incursion into Syria took place. How do you view the upcoming stage of such a move? How do you view the outcome of the upcoming meeting between the Turkish President and the Russian President, which is to take place in Sochi on Tuesday? Hello? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Right. So,
Okay.
do you want me to repeat again the question?
No, I've heard the question.
Okay.
I think this menagerie that is happening in the Middle East is still going on. And the Vice President Pence visit to Turkey is just part of the menagerie that we are experiencing right now in the Middle East. I think Turkey wouldn't be able to dare to cross the borders unless there is a certain agreement previously between Turkey and the U.S. I think what's happening is well planned to invade the northeast of Syria, a rich location with oil and gas, an extension to Kirkuk in Iraq. There's a big possibility that Turkey is looking forward to keep this area. I mean, they might not even withdraw from this area in the future unless the Russians back the Syrians to be able to push the Turkish troops out of it. But again, the Turkish troops actually managed to open the prisons, that they had a lot of prisons and prisoners from ISIS in this particular area, thousands, about maybe 40,000 elements from ISIS were jailed by the Kurds in this particular area. All of these terrorist groups were actually, I don't know really, the time will only tell what will happen to these people. I think they will be utilized to stir up a lot of problems still in the area, especially the confrontation that is coming up in Libya. It's a big game that all of the superpowers are playing, and the victims are the Arabs again and again and again.
Engineer Shaban, if we speak here about, you say that the Turkey could have not moved an inch without the approval of the United States. However, it seems that even if that opinion was true, but it was very much widely criticized in Washington, as the Senate, the U.S. Senate, the Congress, and definitely lawmakers there have resented the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria.
Very true.
If we come back to the real motive of such an incursion of Erdogan, now the Turkish president has unprecedented problems, political problems inside Turkey, economic ones as well. Some of the pressures inside. So how do you view the real motive, or what is the real motive behind such a Turkish incursion into the northern Syria?
It's obvious that the Turks went berserk. They have actually a lot of ambitious plans to regain again parts of the countries that they actually left 100 years ago after the First World War. We have to put in mind that Turkey is forbidden to explore for gas and oil according to a treaty that was signed at that time when they've lost the First World War. So actually next year Turkey will be allowed, the year 2020 will be the year that Turkey will be able to resume drilling and exploring the area for gas and oil. I think Turkey have a plan to to maintain presence in these areas, especially an area like Sirte in Gulf of Sirte in Libya, which is confronting the richest gas and the biggest gas field in the world is lying under the waters of Syria, the regional territory of Libya. So actually Turkish troops in the north, and they actually have terrorist groups that actually belongs to them or actually gets instructions from them in the south. This will apply a lot of pressure over General Haftar in Libya and over us as a threat coming from the Western Desert. Turks will try to violate the agreements that we have reached with the Greek government and the Cyprus government in the Mediterranean. They will try to cause problems in all the fronts to get themselves a location in the gas market in the future. So it's an economical struggle, and I think the Turks is using the U.S. because Turkey and the U.S. go way back, about maybe 200 years of relations before even the U.S. made any diplomatic relations or political relations with the Middle East companies as they are known today.
Yes.
So you have to remember also that Turkey is a member in NATO, and any movement for Turkish troops should have been approved by NATO. They actually cannot really act as an independent entity.
If Turkey is already threatening other members of the NATO of unleashing refugees to them if they do not heed to their own actions. So I don't understand really how the European side would react towards that. But I have only 1 minute left for me there. And what is your expectations for this next stage?
I think, unfortunately, Lebanon will be exposed to a lot of pressure to try to drag Hezbollah into a war or a battle to annihilate Hezbollah, because this is a force that is in the north of Israel, and Israel will not allow Hezbollah to be present in this particular area. Israel is getting rid of all the expected or possible forces that might threaten their existence in the area.
Yes, that is a very important part that you spoke about, dragging Hezbollah into Syria, while at the same time filling out the situation in Lebanon. But that has to be tackled thoroughly. Unfortunately, my time is out. Engineer Hassan Shaaban, political analyst, we thank you so much for being with us. Dear viewers, many thanks for watching. Next Saturday would be following out with the developments taking place in the Middle East. Until next Saturday, it's goodbye.